Hey everyone, my name is Brian MATIASH and I'd like to welcome you to Peachy Live. So this is I think the third live stream that Sarah's done on her channel here, and today is about photography. So before we begin, let me give you a little bit about myself, a little bit of info here. So Sarah and I were talking about a month ago when she shared this idea of this kind of live streaming syndicate of sorts. And so I asked her, hey, can we do something about photography? Because I've been a photographer for, over 20 years. I've been taking photos, and I love sharing the kind of skills and the knowledge of photography with people. So I thought, cool, let's do this, especially today's episode, as a beginner course. We're gonna start, because if we were all here in a room or an auditorium together, and I asked, how many of you like photography? I'd be willing to bet that every single one of you would raise your hand. I've never met anyone who says, you know what, no, I don't like photography. So before we begin, just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that I'm into, let me share some of these photos. So to give you an idea of who I am as a photographer. And so I've been taking photos and kind of teaching photography for a long time. I write articles for photography magazines, and I have my own published book called The Visual Palette. So for me, photography is my passion. It's kind of what I do. And I'm from New York City. I was born and raised in New York, but I now live in Portland, Oregon. So photos like this one it's like 40 minutes from where I live. So same thing with this waterfalls, like maybe an hour and a half from where I live in downtown Portland. So again, for me, photography is just in my blood. It's just one of those things that, I don't know, I couldn't live without. So when I was thinking about what to do today, I thought, let's kind of start at the beginning with getting you guys and girls just ready for just upping the photography game a little bit. Because listen, we all have these things, and on the back or in the front of every single one of these guys is a very powerful camera. And it doesn't take a lot, really. It doesn't take much to just level up. Because for the most part, I think a lot of people just grab their phone and they're just taking, or their camera, and they're just clicking away, and you're not really putting that extra second into thinking about what makes a good photo. So for today's show, we're going to talk about two of the most basic elements of photography. First, we'll talk about composition for a little bit. So composition is how you arrange your photo. And the second, we'll talk about exposure, getting the photo not too dark or not too light. Now, before we jump in, if you're watching this live, there's a live chat box, and I see there's just stuff going through, which is awesome. And we're gonna share I'm actually gonna show you, check this out right here. Boom, there's the chat box. So it's gonna be interactive over here. So throughout the live stream, I'm gonna take some questions, and and if you have any, let me know in the questions below. But also, especially even after the show's over and you're watching the replay, jump in on the comments. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe to Sarah's channel. You can subscribe to mine as well. It's in the description below. All right, so let's go ahead and we will talk about composition. So how many of you, I'm gonna pretend like everyone's here. How many of you kind of understand what composition is? Now let's pretend like a quarter of you raised your hands. So composition is how you lay out your photo. When you take a photo, you're usually taking a photo of something or someone or somewhere, right? There's something that you want to share with people. And so depending on how you arrange that, where you put your subject, that can have the biggest influence on how impactful the photo is. So let's go ahead here. I'm gonna bring up a photo. Let's start with this guy here. And we're going to talk about something called the rule of thirds. So let's start here. All right, so here's a photo. And I took this in Australia one morning, like sunrise. It was, I can't remember where. But do you notice something? Notice how I put the horizon and with a little fisherman towards the bottom of the frame. I let most of the sky kind of take over. And so the reason for doing that is because there's a rule called the rule of thirds. Now watch what happens here. Check this out. Boom. So the rule of thirds basically says, imagine if you were to take your frame, which is kind of the four walls of your photo, and you were to put a tic-tac-toe board on it. So you divide the photo into 9 sections. The rule of thirds says that you should put the kind of main elements of your subject along those, one of the bottom third, top third lines, as well as the left or the right. And ideally, you want to place it in an area where they intersect. So as I go through, you see how I'm intentionally putting these photos in a specific location, like this tree. I could have put the tree anywhere, but I decided to put it in the lower third of the frame. And we're gonna go, right now this is all landscapey stuff, so like, you know, you might be saying, well, I don't really care about this, or this is not what interests me. We're gonna get into people as well, because people, I think for the most part, a lot of you out here, and I'm again off to the right of my screen, I'm kind of looking at the comments section, and I could see the comments kind of going through and through, which is fantastic. You know, ask your questions. But let's just kind of jump in really quickly to the next photo here. This tractor at this tulip field, about maybe 40 minutes from my house. I think a lot of the kind of default mindset for people is to put the subject in the middle of the frame. And usually that falls flat. When you put something in the middle of the frame, especially if it's far away from you, it just doesn't look right. Notice how by keeping the tractor towards the right and upper third of the frame, remember, I'm cutting the frame into thirds. You've got the sky on the top third, you've got the tractor in the middle, and you've got more of the tulips in the foreground on the bottom third. But I put the tractor kind of over there. So I said, yeah, landscapey stuff. Now let's talk about people. So here is a photo I took in Cuba. I was in Cuba last year, and yeah, Sarah, those flowers. Come actually in April, May, if you come out, these flowers will be in full bloom. So this dude, you know, when you think of Havana, you think of Cuba, you know, cigars. They pop out without a doubt. So when I photographed this guy, I intentionally put him on the left side of the frame. I didn't put him in the middle. I didn't put him kind of like in one corner. I put him, he dominated the left side of the frame. So, and is anybody, Pendler is asking if anybody's a Sony lover. Yes, I'm a Sony lover. I shoot all Sony. Sarah shoots all Sony. You're amongst a lot of Sony lover friends. So again, rule of thirds, draw that tic-tac-toe. And same thing, this is my niece, Ashlyn. This is in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so that's where my wife's family is from Nebraska. And we go there during Halloween most years. And of course they have these huge kind of pumpkin patches. And so when I had my niece, Ashlyn, you know, towards the right of the frame. And so, you know, yeah, that to me made a more impactful frame. So here's my point to you guys. Let me just drop out of here so you can see the seriousness of the face. When you're thinking about framing your shot, this is composition is photography 101, because whatever you put, you see me, I'm in this frame, I'm kind of off to the center a little bit. That is your composition. So just take that extra second or two. If you're out with your friends, or you're taking a photo of a friend, for example, with your camera, maybe instead of just kind of putting them in the center, you know, kind of bias them, put them off to the left or to the right a little bit. But here's the thing with rules. The thing with rules is that every rule should be broken. There's always a time and a place to break rules. So if you kind of read around the rule of thirds, which again, break your frame into thirds, there are plenty of situations where it makes sense to put things kind of in the center. So let's jump it here again to another photo. So right there. All right, so this is my buddy Brian. We were at Redwoods National Forest in California, and this is one of those giant sequoia trees. It actually takes about 16 people if you take 16 grown people, hand to hand, to wrap around this tree trunk. So the tree, both the tree and Brian are dead center. And in this situation, it works out well. It's the kind of thing where once you kind of get used to rule of thirds and you understand composition, you know when to break it. Here's another example. And this is something that I think Sarah can appreciate since she's in my hometown of New York. This is the top of the Empire State Building. And so I kind of shot the giant radio antenna tower at the top, put it in the center. It's just one of those things that works. It wouldn't look as good if it was kind of to the left or to the right, putting it dead center. And then finally, we can wrap up kind of composition with one of my two dogs, one of my babies. This is Kodak, like the film. Here's one of those things about center. If you are taking a photo of a person, a friend or family member, and you can get tight on them, meaning you can fill the frame mostly with them, putting them in the center is not a bad thing. So here, this is my dog Kodak, and one of those few moments when he was actually sitting down and smiling, and he had the one ear going up. And so I framed him in the center. So again, just kind of one of those things that when you have a second, sometimes you don't have time. Listen, in photography, it's all about time. That's it. Everything about photography is based on time and light. It should be actually light. But if you have that extra second, think about it. Now here's kind of a pro tip, right? So if you have, most camera phones have this, but I'm gonna go with the iPhone because that's what I use. But you've got the camera app, right? I don't know if you know this, but if you go into the settings, all right, so you click on the settings icon, then go over to photo and camera, there's a toggle, an on-off switch called grid. Turn it on. What that'll do is, you remember that kind of tic-tac-toe overlay that I just showed you? It'll actually put that on your camera. So whenever you're shooting with the camera app, you'll see your rule of thirds. So it'll give you a visual indicator of where to put your subject. So it's just one of those things. Listen, Apple doesn't just put things into their camera apps. Like, they don't just do that. So they put the grid in there. And not just, there are a bunch of different types of grids you can put in photography. They put in the rule of thirds grid. So that says something. I'm not fooling with you. Rule of thirds is probably the most basic compositional element that you can think about when you're taking photos. All right, and this is not just for iPhone. I mean, I'm very certain Google's camera has it. Most third-party camera apps, especially the more pro ones, they'll have a grid option, so you can turn that on. I use it on everything, even on these Sony cameras. The Sony cameras have a grid option to turn on. So it's good for me. I guarantee you it's definitely good for you. Oh, that's not what I wanted. That's what I wanted. I also want to bring up the comments. So let's see here. Are there any questions? There are a lot of, oh man, there are a lot of questions. Oh man. Sarah, I don't know even where to go. Does anyone know how to transition from video to photography? So this is a good question, not kind of part of it. I'll get it really. So there's a question right here on the screen by Nefertiti that's asking about transitioning from video to photo. I don't know if I've ever met someone that's done that transition. All of the people I know are photographers that are, including myself, that are transitioning to video. So yeah. And then Madeline, you're from Boston? I think I saw you earlier that you're in Boston. How did I start in photography? Super quickly, because I want to go into this. It's a longer story, but when I started 1996, for those of you that have not been born, that was like 21 years ago. I think, yeah, 96, I graduated high school and I started my first year of college at Syracuse University in upstate New York. So I'm from New York City, and I was up in kind of central New York. That was the first time in 18 years, first time in my life that I ever left Brooklyn. I lived at home. I have a loving mother and father, a great sister. And that was the first time I left. So I was at my dorm, and I had really bad kind of separation anxiety and kind of like fear of, I wouldn't, other than like going to classes, I wouldn't go anywhere. I was terrified. And so my parents bought me a camera, because there's something about being able to kind of put a camera in front of your face, kind of took me outside of things, and I felt protected. And that was it. I mean, from there, it started. I still learn every day, but it was a long journey of learning about my 1987. Oh my God. I'm 38, so I'll be the old guy in the room. But so yeah, that's how I started. I was afraid to go out, and so this thing that I put in front of my face, this is way before digital. So every exposure cost money. So it clicked. It became something that I thought I really like this, and it wasn't until maybe 15 years later that I thought I can start making a living out of it. So don't put too much pressure on yourselves in that regards. All right. We're having fun. But here, let's talk about the second part of kind of photography 101, which is exposure. Not like exposure, but getting it so that the thing that you're taking a photo of is not, it's like properly lit. You know what I mean? It's not too dark. How many times you go somewhere, you take a photo, and it's like, oh man, it's too dark. And so you turn the flash on and you irradiate your subject with light, and now they're too bright. So exposure is what you do to control that, the amount of light that hits the sensor of your camera. And I don't want to get into too much of a nitty gritty, but here's what we're going to do. Check this out. This is going to be fun. All right, that was a cool transition. All right, so what you have here is my camera. And Pendler says exactly right. So Pendler's hitting on there are three elements of exposure, the holy trinity. If you want to be religious about photography, that's your trinity. Aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So let's take a look at it here. What you're seeing here is my camera. You're seeing it as if my eyes were behind it. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's take Optimus Prime. So I grew up in the 80s. Optimus Prime is like my moral compass. If it was good for Optimus Prime, it was good for me. So let's focus on him. So this is the lens that I have on here is manual focus. So this is actually kind of cool. You'll see exactly how I take a photo. So we'll get focus on Optimus. All right. So now Optimus is in focus. And actually, let's frame him a little bit. Cool. All right. Pretty cool, right? I mean, even his like individual fingers move. So exposure is three things: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So aperture. If you think about it, if you had your camera sensor or like a piece of film, everything about photography is light hitting that film. So there, imagine if I were to take kind of like, a circle like this and I put it in front of your eye, a big circle. A lot of light's coming through, right? But imagine if you drop that to a tiny, tiny circle and you put it in front of your eye, there's much less light. That circle, the size of that circle, that's the aperture. So when watch here, if you see in the bottom of this frame, you see f 2.0. Aperture is it's represented as an f-stop. So f 2.0 is the aperture. Now here's kind of what exposure is all about. You see kind of to the right of f 2.0, there's a meter and it says -0.7. Basically, that is indicating your exposure value. So if it's negative 0.7, that means that for Optimus Prime, meaning if we're exposing, if we're trying to get Optimus Prime to look properly lit, we're actually kind of a 1/3 to 2/3 under. So with Aperture, that's the first variable that you can adjust. So again, as I increase my aperture, meaning I'm making the hole smaller now, notice how it's getting darker? So that's the first element of exposure that you can work with. Now what we're doing is we're working in manual. So imagine this is manual mode 101. If this is kind of like if you want to bring photography, if you really want to start to understand photography, go into manual mode. And the first thing you're going to want to adjust is your aperture. So here I'm kind of adjusting aperture, making it brighter and darker. Now there are two other elements that you can adjust for exposure. Let's say you want to have a wide aperture, and do you see what happens with a wide aperture? Notice how my bookshelf in the background is really soft and out of focus. Now watch what happens if I drop that aperture and then I adjust. Notice how it got darker? It got darker because that hole got smaller, so there's less light's hitting the sensor. So what do you have to do? Well, you can do one of two things now. Now we can adjust the second variable, which is shutter speed. So the shutter speed is when you take a photo, basically there's this shutter that opens, lets light in for a certain amount of time, and then closes. That amount of time is your shutter speed. So right now, the shutter speed is represented by 1/25 of a second, which is to the left. If I make it a longer shutter speed, notice how it's getting brighter, but also notice how the bookshelf is getting more and more in focus. So watch, I'm gonna make this aperture f/22. Notice now the bookshelf is like, you can see the books. And what I'm doing every time I make the aperture smaller, meaning I make the circle smaller, and this is kind of the weird thing with aperture, the smaller the circle, the larger the number. So tiny circle, f/22. And wide circle, like huge circle, f2. It's just one of those things you have to associate. So here, what we have is we're getting close to a proper exposure. So here's what I did. Let's say I have the aperture at f/22, and now my exposure is a little over 3 seconds. That's a long exposure for hand holding. So let's say you want to, you want to make the shutter speed a little bit faster. Variable number 3, ISO. ISO is, I've been trying to think of a way to explain ISO in kind of a easy to understand definition. The closest thing I could think of is it's the sensitivity of the sensor. So the lower the number, so 100, 125 ISO, excuse me, the less sensitive the sensor is. So typically, a lot of times, photographers will be shooting at 100, 125, 200, because the higher the ISO, there are two things that happen when you increase your ISO. Your sensor becomes more sensitive, which means you can make your shutter speed faster. So imagine holding the camera still, perfectly still for 3 seconds. It's really hard to do, especially if you drink as much coffee as I do. So by increasing the ISO, you're making the sensor more sensitive to light, but it comes at a trade-off. Everything has a trade-off. With ISO, the more you increase the ISO, the more signal noise you're going to introduce. So if I take the ISO here and I make it like let's just bring it up to 8,000. Notice now, you see how the exposure, remember before I said the exposure was negative 0.3? Notice now it's +2 and it's blinking. That means that we are way blowing out it's too bright. So here, what can we do? Well, what can we do? We are at f/22, that's the smallest aperture. So we have to adjust the shutter. So it's like a pulley system. It's like 3 different pulleys. So I'm gonna make the shutter faster. Now we're getting to a place where hand holding is possible. So right around 1/10 of a second. So is this something that's kind of like I want to make sure that this is something that, and I'm looking at the comments right now, that please understand, guys, this is the most basic. From here, we're on the ground floor. Every subsequent episode of Peachy Live, Photography Edition, we're gonna grow. So don't worry if this is even too much. We'll still, leave your questions. We're still gonna grow. But at 8,000, just going back, ISO 8,000, if I were to take the photo and preview it, I wonder if it's gonna let me preview. No, I guess not. Anyway, oh wait, maybe it is. Oh yeah, cool. So if I were to preview it and then zoom in, you see all this noise? That's signal noise. That's just kind of what it is. So the higher your ISO, you get the benefit that you can have a faster shutter speed, but you get more of this noise. So watch, let's do this. Let's drop that ISO back to like 200. And now what we're gonna do is, instead of adjusting the shutter speed, let's adjust the aperture. So now we're opening up that circle, we're letting more light in. And now we're gonna open it. See how now the exposure, the meter shows 0.0? 0.0 means that you are evenly exposed. You are properly exposed for whatever it is that you are metering off of. So in this case, I'm metering off of Optimus Prime, total awesome dude. And you can see, look, he looks properly lit, right? So let's take that photo, and I think the reason why it took so long to show the preview is because it's writing a 36 megapixel file. So it takes a bit of time. All right, so here we go. Let's zoom in now. Oops, wrong button. Notice, so much clearer. So look, I'm gonna zoom into, there's Optimus. Now let's go to the same photo just before. First thing you'll notice is difference in aperture. See how with f/22, everything from the foreground to the background's in focus? But then f2, it's that nice separation. So let's go here and zoom in. Do you see here how much more noise there is? That is the problem, or not the problem, but that is what you have to consider with high ISO. So that's basically, I mean, I say basically like it's no big deal. That's basically exposure. Let me get, oh man, I love this Optimus Prime figure. It's combining 3 variables to get a proper exposure. Aperture, size of the hole that's allowing the light into the sensor, shutter speed. So now that you have that hole set, how long or how much light will you let in? Will it be 1/100th of a second, or will it be 30 seconds? And they each have their kind of place in photography. And finally, ISO. So if you really have to have a specific aperture and shutter speed, but it's still too dark, that's where ISO comes in. So that's where, with night photography, especially with night photography, like stars, and if you're in a dimly lit, like a party in a club or something, bottle full of bub, you want to make sure that you adjust your ISO. And things like this, the camera on your phone, it does all those things for you. So, you pick it up, you hit a button, and you're off. When you want to grow to that next level of photography, especially if your camera has a manual mode, that's where you start to understand that relationship between aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So that's that. Let's really quickly, before we kind of put a bow on this, let's jump into the comments here. And, oh yeah, I want to put this up too. Pendler. Pendler's been on fire with questions. What's more important, the camera or the lens? Man, that's a great question. That's a great question. What's more important, the camera or the lens? Me? The glass, the lens, is the most important thing in my opinion. And I'm talking about if we're in 2017, and you can take just about any digital camera out there, from the lowest quality one to the big red cameras, and you can create a beautiful photo. I mean, camera sensors have really come a long way. Where you differentiate, where you separate, is with the glass, because not all glass is made equally. For me, I'm a big fan of prime lenses. So the lens I'm using here is a prime lens, meaning it's just one. This is 35 millimeters, one focal length, but it opens up. We were talking about aperture of 2.0. Because I have that 2.0, I'm able to make that nice separation. You saw the Optimus Prime photo, so that has nothing to do with the camera. That's all with the lens. Also, just the quality of the glass of your lens will determine things like how punchy the colors are, and a bunch of other things. So, what camera is this? This is the Sony A7R Mark II, Zeiss Loxia, 35 millimeter f2. So, and I am, for what it's worth, I am a Zeiss global lens ambassador. So I'm kind of partnered with Zeiss. I use their glass all the time. Let's see what we have here. Is there any free alternative to Lightroom? Is there a free alternative to Lightroom? Lightroom is a photography app that where most photographers use it to manage their photos and do some cool edits. I use Lightroom as well. I don't know of a free one, to be honest. Oh man, how many, Sarah, this is so crazy. Best lens to start with. Best lens to start with. Who asked that? That was Ned. As a starter, depends. Do you want to kind of you want to challenge yourself? If you want to challenge yourself, I would say 35 millimeter prime lens, because 35 millimeters is kind of the native focal length of film. So when you bought a camera, film camera, somewhere over there, that was a 35 millimeter film camera. So a 35 millimeter lens would fit nicely if you're using a full frame camera. I would just say a 24 to 70. Otherwise, a 24 to 70, solid lens. What do we have here? Oh my God, Sarah, there are a lot of questions. I just want to pick a few more because I don't want to take up too much. We're already 5 minutes over. So I'm going to do one more camera. And I see Matt Rappaport, NYC actor. What's going on? Thanks for joining. Oh my God. What camera and lenses do you have for portraits, Brian? I don't. Actually, really quickly, Maribelga's asking what the F stands for in f-stop. Honestly, I have no idea. I have no idea. But the quicker you kind of just take it to f2.8, f16, the better. Just know that f/, that's your aperture. Always, always, always. What camera? So I don't really shoot portraits. Very rarely, you know. I'll close out with this so you can learn a little bit more about Brian. Let's have some bonding time, just for a minute. I'm actually red-green colorblind, so I can't discern reds and pinks, and I can't discern a lot of greens. Some greens look like brown to me, and I can't tell the difference. But reds, I can't discern. And what most people have some sort of reddish, peachy hue to their skin. I mean, if you get more towards kind of either black or kind of a darker skin tone, that I can tell without a doubt. That's much easier. But if I'm photographing someone who is more Caucasian or tan, I can't really tell the skin tone. So that's why I don't shoot people very often. I mostly stick to landscape. When I go traveling to other countries, I'll shoot people, but I always have to ask my wife to help me with skin tones, because a lot of times I tend to, even if you watch my videos on YouTube, the kind of the LUTs or the presets that I apply, my skin tone almost always, I'm not even sure right now the way you're seeing me if that's looking good. So All right, guys and girls, thank you so much for spending this, time with me on Saturday. Sarah, thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. We're going to be doing this every week on Peachy Live, so be sure to have your questions. I'm going to scan through them. There are a few other cool things we have in the works. Like, we're going to start doing a thing where you can submit your photos for critique. We'll critique them live. We'll get that in an upcoming episode. But for now, just be sure to hit the subscribe button down below on Sarah's channel so you can get access to more Peachy Live with Sam Sheffer for tech. Sarah's going to be doing her thing. So tomorrow, Sunday, Sarah's going to be doing her Peachy Live broadcast on video. So I'm handling photography side of things. Sarah, I mean, you're here because you love her videos. So she's going to be sharing that process. There's also Sam Sheffer is doing tech. So just if you're into tech like we are. And then finally, excuse me, Timmy Ham, the man, if you're into illustration. So Sarah's really got a really cool thing going. So subscribe down below. If you want to follow me on YouTube, my information's down below. And then just on social media, I'm at Brian MATIASH everywhere. That's the benefit of having a really weird last name. So again, thank you. Leave your comments below. We'll be going through them. And then don't forget to watch Peachy Live tomorrow with Sarah. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.